Believe it or not, I actually didn't plan this. Based on the memoir Rocket Boys by retired NASA engineer Homer Hickam Jr., October Sky tells the story of a group of teenagers from Coalwood, West Virginia, who, after the launch of Sputnik, are inspired to start building their own rockets. Despite their limited education and the disapproval of peers and parents alike, Homer Hickam and his friends, Roy Lee, Odell, and Quentin, are able to win the National Science Fair and free themselves from a life working in the coal mines. But how does the movie hold up to its source material? Let's take a look and find out. Despite a few changes and additions, the film comes across as a pretty accurate portrayal of its source material, including such important details as the launch of Sputnik on October 4th, 1957, and Homer Hickam's astonished reaction upon seeing the satellite for the first time, Homer and his friends, Roy Lee and Odell, destroying his mother's fence during the launch of their first rocket. The failure of the Vanguard rocket, America's first attempt to get into space, in December of 1957. Though it's worth noting that, unlike in the film, Homer's hero, Dr. Wernher von Braun, did not work on the Vanguard project. Homer enlisting the help of Big Creek High School's most intelligent and arguably most unpopular student, Quentin Wilson, to help with the construction of his next rocket. The Rocket Boys' decision to start using black powder, an explosive mixture of potassium nitrate, sulfur, saltpeter, and charcoal as their next fuel. Homer enlisting the aid of Mr. Wachowski, a welder from the mine, to help with the construction of their rockets. Mr. Turner, the principal of Big Creek High School, giving Homer and Quentin a disheartening speech about the dangers of rockets, only to be rebuked by their teacher, Miss Riley, who encourages them to enter the local science fair. Homer's decision to name their rockets Auk after an extinct bird that couldn't fly, the near-fatal mishap that occurred when a rocket veered off course toward the mine, and Mr. Hickam's less than enthusiastic response to the event, the creation of Cape Coalwood on an abandoned slag dump, and the switch from using black powder to a mixture of potassium chlorate and sugar. Mr. Wachowski's reassignment to work in the mine as punishment for helping Homer with his rockets, Odell's brilliant idea to dig up an abandoned railroad line so they can sell the scrap metal for rocket supplies, the illegal procurement of a bottle of moonshine to use as a binding agent for rocket fuel, Homer receiving a letter and autographed picture from Dr. Wernher von Braun, as well as a book on rockets from Miss Riley, state troopers accusing the Rocket Boys of starting a forest fire, which it turns out was actually caused by an aeronautical flare, the tragic death of Mr. Wachowski during a mining accident, which also injured Mr. Hickam's right eye, Miss Riley revealing to Homer that she is suffering from Hodgkin's disease, a form of cancer that attacks the lymph nodes, the 1960 miners' strike, and the assault on the Hickam house by a mystery gunman, Homer's victory at the local science fair, and his trip to Indianapolis to compete in the national competition. The theft and speed replacement of Homer's rocket paraphernalia, resulting in a victory at the National Science Fair, and finally, Homer's triumphant return to Coalwood and the resulting celebratory rocket display, where Mr. Hickam is given the honor of launching the final rocket. October Sky also includes quite a few book-accurate details, such as Quentin's frequent use of the word prodigious, the ocean mural that Homer's mother painted in the Hickam family kitchen, and the fact that Roy Lee was the only boy out of the group who owned a car. October Sky also features a few examples of book-accurate dialogue, something that occurs so rarely when reviewing historical media that it felt like a crime not to mention it.
Now don't let anybody copy my homework.
Just don't blow yourself up.
Homer here wants to be a rocket scientist. Is that it, John?
He had no idea what he wants to be. But I know what he is. He's a menace, and he's a damn thief. And so is whoever helps him.
But with that said, it's time to move on to Mr. Hickam's name is changed from Homer to John in the film, probably because the filmmakers believed that two characters with the same name would probably be a bit confusing. Though, interestingly enough, during his childhood, Homer Hickam Jr. was almost always referred to as Sonny, a nickname given to him by his mother to reflect his sunny personality. However, for the sake of consistency, I'm going to keep referring to him as Homer, while his father will be Mr. Hickam. Homer Hickam Jr. was 14 and a freshman in high school when Sputnik was launched in 1957, not 17 like in the film. Sherman, Homer's childhood friend and a founding member of the Rocket Boys, is cut out of the film, along with Billy, the last person to join the Rocket Boys, and Tex, Homer's friend and fellow rock enthusiast that he met during the National Science Fair in Indianapolis. Homer and the rest of the Rocket Boys refer to themselves as the Big Creek Missile Agency, a name meant to pay homage to Dr. Von Braun's Army Ballistic Missile Agency. While the film never references this directly, it does feature a flag bearing the name Coalwood Missile Agency, which is still incorrect, but they do get points for acknowledging that they had a flag. Rather than the AUK-1, it was actually the AUK-4 that ended up on a collision course with the Coalwood mine, tearing off a sizable chunk of Mr. Hickam's office upon landing. Mr. Hickam was so embarrassed by the event that he disposed of all of Homer's chemicals, though this did little to stop the BCMA, as tests soon resumed at a new location outside of company property. The real Cape Coalwood was built on a slack dump in an area called Big Branch, which was still technically on company property. The area was gifted to Homer and the BCMA by Mr. Hickam, who said that the land was useless and far enough away from town so that the noise wouldn't bother the citizens of Coalwood. Prior to this, the BCMA had climbed up Water Tank Mountain to test their propellant mixtures, but the noise from the tests had caused a bit of a stir in town, as some residents jumped to the conclusion that the mine was exploding. Homer's friends, Odell and Roy Lee, have their backgrounds altered a bit for the film. While it's true that Roy Lee's father lost his life in the mine, the filmmakers decide to up the tragedy by giving him an abusive stepfather, and killing off Odell's father, Red, who, according to the book, was actually the town garbage man, not a miner. And I thought Disney was bad when it came to killing off parents. At least their movies are fictional. Well, mostly. While the reveal of Quentin's poor financial situation comes across as a bit of a shock in the film, in the book, Homer deduces fairly early on that Quentin's family isn't exactly well off. In addition to his ragged clothes and lack of lunch money, Homer was well aware that Quentin lived in Bartley, another mining town where layoffs and poverty were fairly commonplace. The film really doesn't give you a sense of just how much work the mine's machinists put into the construction of the BCMA's rockets. While the members of the BCMA were responsible for mixing propellants and designing rocket parts, all the actual metalworking was done by the mine's machinists, who took time out of their already busy schedules to painstakingly build 31 rockets. the largest of which was 6 feet long. It's also worth noting that most of the metal and materials used in the construction of these rockets were donated to the BCMA by Mr. Hickam. Combining the cost of materials and labor, Homer Hickam himself estimated that each rocket would have cost about $1,000 or more.
I estimate now to build one of those big steel rockets that we were building would cost you in the neighborhood at least $25,000.
Far outside the spending limit of the average high school student. Unlike in the film, the BCMA used 3 rather than 2 different fuel mixtures. Starting with black powder in 1957, they then switched to using a potassium chloride and sugar mixture, dubbed rocket candy for its sweet smell, before switching again to using a concoction of zinc dust, sulfur, and alcohol, aptly named Zincoshine. Just like in the film, the BCMA used illegally sourced moonshine to create Zincoshine, though the filmmakers decided to omit the part about them getting drunk, driving under the influence, and getting pulled over by the local constable. According to the book, the Rocket Boys' run-in with the state troopers played out a bit differently than it does in the film. While being questioned, Quentin and Homer were given the chance to examine the rocket that was responsible for the Davie Forest fire, which Quentin identified as an aeronautical flare. Being that the Welch Airport was closer to Mount Davie than Cape Coalwood, the state troopers realized that they'd probably made a mistake and quietly left the school with their tails between their legs. In the film, not only are the Rocket Boys arrested for starting the forest fire, the shame and public ridicule they receive forces them to give up building rockets altogether, until Homer is able to prove their innocence using the power of math. While it's true that Homer did briefly retire from building rockets, this didn't happen until after the death of Mr. Wachowski, which, given the circumstances, was understandably devastating. It was only after Miss Wachowski asked him to keep building rockets that he found the strength to crawl out of his funk and start working towards entering the science fair. In the film, after his father is injured in a mining accident, Homer quits school to work in the mine to help support his family. In reality, while it's true that Mr. Hickam was injured during a mining accident, his absence from work only lasted a few weeks. And even if his sick leave had lasted longer, it's unlikely that Homer or his brother Jim would have been sent to work in the coal mine. Miss Hickam was adamant that her children would never become miners, as she was well aware that working in the mine had negatively affected her husband's health. With that in mind, Mr. Hickam had initially intended to find his son a job working outside the mine, probably as a clerk or an office worker. But this wasn't what Homer wanted, so he started building rockets to show his father what he was capable of. The BCMA's foray into the scrap business wasn't for the purpose of buying steel for their rockets, but was instead to help settle a debt with the mine's general superintendent, Mr. Van Dyke. Intent on improving the state of communications at Cape Coalwood, Roy Lee and Odell broke into the old mule barn, once used to house retired mine mules, to steal some old mine telephones. However, during the operation, the old floor of the mule barn gave way, trapping the boys inside until they were found by the local constable. Fortunately, Mr. Van Dyke agreed not to press charges, and gave them the opportunity to purchase the phone equipment on credit. Also, rather than dismantling and selling the actual train tracks, Odell's plan was to sell the cast iron drainage pipes buried underneath, which were obtained only after days of intensive digging. Unfortunately, Odell's plan didn't actually pay off, as the money they earned from selling the scrap was less than expected, and after paying for expenses, such as equipment and food, their total earnings amounted to about $4. Luckily, Jake Mosby, a mine engineer and supporter of the BCMA, agreed to pay off their debts on the condition that they agreed to clean his car for approximately the rest of time. Unlike in the film, the Rocket Boys were not given scholarships after their victory at the National Science Fair, though they did all attend college. Roy Lee, Odell, and Billy joined the Air Force and were able to go to college through the GI Bill. Sherman and Homer both had families that could afford to pay or help out with their tuition, while Quentin, despite a sufficient lack of funding, was able to enroll and graduate from Marshall College with a bachelor's degree in chemistry. You really have to admire that kind of dedication. While I could go on for hours about everything that the filmmakers chose to omit, the football fathers and their lawsuit, the relationship between Jake Mosby and Miss Riley, or even Miss Hickam's very annoying pet squirrel, I think it'd be best to stop here. If you're interested in finding out more, the book isn't too hard to find. I was able to find a copy at my local library, or you can check out Mr. Hickam's new book, Don't Blow Yourself Up, which is set to come out this October. As always, I'm Silver Jade, and I hope to see you again next time.